Joining us now, live from Capitol Hill, actually, is Ryan Grimm. Ryan is the Washington Bureau editor for the Huffington Post. He's a friend of the show. He's been on before, and he has been covering a lot of the action up on the Hill lately, including the new so-called health care bill from the Republican Party. And he had a good piece this week about its effort to end Medicare as we know it. So, Ryan, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And we won't ask you to talk loud because I know you're probably in a hearing room right now. But
no, it's fine. I'm actually surrounded by hundreds of tourists.
Oh, okay. Well, shout if you want to.
So,
but
exactly.
And it's a topic worth shouting about, actually, which is the fact that one of the things that's getting underreported in the coverage of this, and I keep calling it so-called health care bill, because let's face it, it's a tax cut bill for the wealthy that pays for the tax cut by repealing some of the additional taxes that were put in the Affordable Care Act. So, and undoing some of the coverage that came along with it. That's the way I look at it. But as your piece points out, it does even more than that, because it's actually designed to end Medicare as we know it. And tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, it does. It's, a dream of people like Paul Ryan, since they were young children, or at least early adults, has been to eviscerate the New Deal and Great Society programs that were built up throughout the 20th century. They basically have killed welfare. That was one they've been going after. And the other legs of it really are just unemployment insurance, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And they're in this bill, they basically destroy Medicaid. They defederalize it so that right now it's kind of a federal guarantee of a set of benefits covered in large part by taxes from the federal government. Paul Ryan's plan would send it to the states and cap its growth, which would mean, that as costs rise over the years, the value of it becomes less and less, and states would have the ability to trim it here and there, trim the rolls, and otherwise basically dismantle the program if they chose to, which they can't currently do with it as a federal program.
Yeah, and let's talk about what you just said for a second. I mean, because I think there are two issues here. One is getting to their motivation, confirming that their motivation is to end these programs, and then talking about how they do it. When you say that people like Paul Ryan have been trying to do this since they were young adults, you have in your piece a quote that Ryan says sometimes, or he told Rich Lowry, the editor of the Right Wing National Review, "We've been dreaming of doing this since I've been around, since you and I were drinking at a keg," which you take, I think rightly, to mean his college days when he was first introduced to the mysteries of Ayn Rand. And of course, they could have thrown a kegger last week. So, I mean, but chances are this is a long time. This is a long time dream of these guys. And then getting to the mechanism of it, it gets a little arcane for some people, but basically, it seems to me like this is exactly parallel to what Ryan wants to do with Medicare, which is give people a voucher, make sure that the value of that voucher, or in the case of Medicaid, give the states an amount of money, make sure that doesn't increase very quickly, while at the same time medical costs are increasing much more quickly than regular inflation. So every year it's less and less and less until over time, these programs are essentially worth nothing. And isn't that, in fact, what they're doing and the reason why they're doing it?
Yes. That's exactly what they're doing. Yeah, it's not, they can dress it up as being complicated maneuver, but it's not. It's a cut, pure and simple, and it effectively ends the program as a federal guarantee for not just you think of it as maybe for single mothers and children, or for the for the lower working class, but as well, there are some 11 million seniors who rely on Medicaid for things like nursing care. If if you got rid of Medicaid, you're back to a place where when people are unable to take care of themselves, they have to find their way into a poorhouse or into your own, into their kids' basements, or cobble together some kind of treatment that way. The other thing that people don't quite realize is that all of these specialty hospitals around the country, particularly ones that focus on rare childhood diseases, we are, when it comes to our healthcare system, we're at the top of the world in treating these specialty diseases, the kinds that really tug at your heartstrings. And the reason, and this has not been reported much, but the reason that these hospitals are able to stay in business is largely because of Medicaid. You think of these high-tech, sophisticated hospitals that focus on a particular specialty when it comes to a childhood disease as kind of the epitome of the private sector, 1% approach to healthcare, but that's a myth. And in fact, more than 50% of their revenue comes from Medicaid. So if you strip that away, many of these high-end specialty children's hospitals fall away as well.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that. I think it's another fantastic point that, in fact, Medicaid finances a lot of the technology and a lot of the capability that they or their families, people tend to turn Medicaid recipients into quote-unquote poor people, and therefore the other, which ignores two really important points. One is that a lot of people in this country, most people in fact, will experience at least a year of poverty in their life. But the other is that services that go to this so-called other, if you're not among the lower income populations of this country, also benefit you. And that if those programs
Right.
go away, you lose that benefit. I think that's a fantastic point. And another thing that I think is really important about this whole story, and again, we're talking with Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post, is that, I'm seeing years ago, I spent years working in health benefits, other benefits, the financing and economics and planning of them in the private sector. And we saw the transition from what was called a defined benefit to a defined contribution. That, for example, pension. That you worked. It used to be you worked at the company 30 years, then you got 60% of your salary when you retired. No, now the company puts an X amount to a 401k, and that's all you get, and it could be 5%. Right. Or same thing with certain forms of benefits. No, we'll put in this amount, and you get what you get for it. So it's no more that you get a guaranteed benefit. So it's now seems to me that's what these guys, and it's decimated the retirement security of working Americans, decimated the health security. People are paying more and more out of pocket. It seems to me that's what they're doing to these social programs now, isn't it?
Right. That's a good way of thinking about it. The federal government, under the new regime, would be making a defined contribution to your health care coverage through Medicaid. And you get what you get, and you don't get upset. And if your costs, your health care costs, are greater than the contribution, then you're out of luck. You'll find it somewhere else, just in the way that if your 401k is puny when you're retiring, well, that's too bad.
Right. And I want to get back to the human side of it because apparently people respond to human stuff. I don't know, but because I think it's very important for people to understand that while to liberals, progressives, sometimes this can seem abstract, to be honest, that to conservatives, and that's what I liked about your piece a lot, they love this stuff. They actually love taking this stuff away from people who need it. And so I really like, you quoted conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt and his conversation with Paul Ryan. And Hewitt starts out by saying the Medicaid devolution in capping. And so he's very clear. He says we're devolving Medicaid into non-existence by capping the funding. And he goes on to say, is the most significant entitlement reform of my 60 years on this planet, says Hugh Hewitt, which, by the way, raises the parenthetical question, which planet was he on before then? But, the the whole notion, and Ryan gets excited and says, "Oh, sure, oh for sure, welfare reform is a $16 billion program. We're talking about trillions in the end." These guys are blatantly trying to take this stuff away, aren't they?
Yes, and they're so enthusiastic about it, and it's useful to listen to the right wing media because that's where where they speak to each other and speak freely about what the goal is around what they're doing here. And the secondary goal that Ryan had, with Lowry and with Hugh Hewitt and with those types of interviews is to say, look, we get that you might not like what we're doing with the Obamacare exchanges, that that we're kind of in principle doing the same thing that you've always objected to, but look at what we're doing to Medicaid. This is the conservative dream come true. So, he even says, see the forest through the trees. Like, look, this is our opportunity to savage Medicaid. Don't pass it up just because we're not also savaging the Obamacare exchanges in the way that you would prefer that we would. So that's kind of the argument that he's making. The irony, of course, is that the Medicaid cuts are the most politically toxic part. And so on the one hand, they're both the carrot and the stick. They're the thing that on an ideological, theoretical level are the most attractive about Ryan's proposal to conservatives, but on a practical political level for people who are up for re-election in 2018, they're the worst part of it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because certainly on the on the governor's side, we've seen a lot of Republicans pushing back on cuts to the Affordable Care Act because that's going to hit them politically. The ones that accepted the Medicaid funding in particular, but a lot of them, Kentucky comes to mind. But are some of these Republican members of Congress really worried that there's going to be a payback for them if they do this, or do they think their voters always think of Medicaid recipients, even their voters that are on Medicaid, do they always think of Medicaid recipients as the other guys, the people with a different skin color?
No, they're very worried about it, and that's why even in Paul Ryan's plan, they push a lot of these changes off to 2019 and 2020, and the conservative freedom, the Freedom Caucus folks say, we know what you're doing here. You're going to push these off to 19 or 20, and then in 19 or 20, you're going to push them off to 22 and 23. And then in 22 and 23, Congress is going to push them off to 2024, and then you're not going to do it in 2024. That's a presidential year, so you push it to 25, and you're never going to do it. And I think that there is ample justification for that paranoia, that fear on the part of the Freedom Caucus. So, even Ryan, who's saying this is the greatest thing conservatives have done in 60 years, is afraid to do it right away.
Yeah, and I guess I want to close with this, Ryan. I need to get up to the Hill more often. I'm here in D.C. I do get up, but sometimes it's just important to look at these guys when they announce, to me, when they announce this stuff, because, I just think, what kind of human being are you? Really,
Yeah.
I mean, I've described Paul Ryan as a kind of human smiley face. He's this cherubic little guy. It comes across like hello, I'll be your server tonight kind of presentation about him. But then he does these horrific things, and I just wonder what's inside these people. Do you have any closing thoughts on that?
Well, he has, Paul Ryan specifically has been, a member of the kind of professional, Gibbs called it the professional left. He's been a member of the professional right his entire life. He was a Hill intern, and then I think he was at Heritage, and he was bouncing around in his early 20s in the kind of the space occupied, that runs from the Randians to like the Randian sympathizers who are all getting money from largely Koch Industries, but then also some big benefactors, and it's created this massive ecosystem in Washington where you can have an entire career as a staffer for politicians linked to this group or institutions that are kind of the landmarks of it. And I think over time, your worldview just hardens, because everybody that you meet with agrees with you, and anybody who doesn't is out.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And of course, the Randians believe that anybody who's poor is a parasite who deserves to die anyway. At least Ayn Rand believed that and wrote that. So, yeah, I guess you live in this bubble of insulated intellectual brutality you don't even feel anymore, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
Um, But, well, thanks for staying there. Thanks for reporting on these guys and spelunking in the dark caves of the human spirit, as I like to think of it. But Ryan Grant, Washington Bureau Editor for the Huffington Post, thanks for the good reporting and thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it was a pleasure.